Seven Lakes Alliance. We're a nonprofit in the Belgrade Lakes working to conserve lands and waters. We have an extensive land trust and 7 trail systems. We also conduct water quality science in collaboration with Colby College. We work to reduce erosion problems with the YCC, Lake Smart, and with lake associations. Lastly, we protect against invasive aquatic plants like milfoil. You've probably seen our CBIs on the boat launches, or maybe you've seen or heard about milfoil removal in Great Pond. Paul Powers is a master naturalist, and this presentation is part of his work in that program. Maine's native amphibians are seldom thought of, but provide a vital role in the stability of our natural resources as an indicator species, including some of our Seven Lakes Alliance properties. We have a lot of vernal pools, and also just streams and ponds and lakefront. Paul Powers is a master naturalist and wildlife photographer. He's giving us an educational presentation encouraging greater awareness of Maine's native amphibians. He grew up in Pennsylvania and has always been captivated by nature and wildlife. He's been a wildlife photographer for the past 20 years, which has taken him to many places and allowed him to become involved in many environmental projects. So I think that's where I'm gonna leave it and hand it over to Paul. So yeah, just a reminder, if you could open chat and post your questions in there or just say hello to everyone. That's it.
Okay, well, Lauren, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Let's see what we could do here. I'm going to start sharing my screen and let me know if you can see it. Okay, can you see it? Lauren, can you see the presentation? Lauren.
Yes.
Okay, the presentation, okay, great. We're gonna get started. Again, first of all, I owe an apology for anybody who wanted to participate last week. Unfortunately, just minutes before the presentation should have been given, we came up with a family emergency, but I'm happy to report, at the time it was quite confusing, but I'm happy to report everything has turned out quite well. So please accept my apologies for last week, and hopefully we can enjoy today's presentation centered around toads and frogs. So first of all, I'd like to thank major support for this webinar, which is being provided by Seven Lakes Alliance. I think Lauren did an excellent job informing everybody about the importance that Seven Lakes Alliance plays. And it's key to our success here in the ecology of the state of Maine. I also would like to offer additional support. This webinar is being put on with the help of Unity College, Chewonki Foundation, the Center for Wildlife, Maine Wildlife Park, and Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. As Lauren mentioned, I am a Maine master naturalist and a wildlife photographer. I have been photographing wildlife for the past 20, 25 years in the field in their natural habitat. And it's not until I enrolled into the Maine Master Naturalist program that we were asked to come up with a capstone project. Mine centered around amphibians and reptiles, are the native amphibians and reptiles here in the state of Maine. But I wanted to do something different. I wanted to capture them in a way that they had possibly never been captured before. I wanted to photograph each of the species individually on a black background, having them being the center of attention and full capability of identifying them. So I started out photographing, and here I am in location. This is at Chewonki Foundation. I am photographing one of their box turtles. And I must emphasize to you the fact that what I do is I'm very conscious about the behavior I don't tend to stress any of these amphibians or reptiles out. I will limit the number of photographs that I will take to about 20. If I don't capture the photograph that I'm looking for within those 20 photographs, then I stop. Second of all, I never ever handle the ambassadors or wildlife ambassadors or the reptiles, amphibians myself. That's always being taken care of by their human handlers. Majority of the photographs that you're taking have been, these are species that are being kept in captivity, not being able to be reduced back into the wild for some reasons. And so that's how we were photographing them. So around 40% of our amphibian species are threatened with extinction. But Maine sets up a state conservation status, and they have several criteria that they use to be able to determine the status of our Maine amphibians and reptiles. One is the least concern, which means for now, the species is doing fairly well, but they should be kept an eye on. But for now, they're doing fairly well. The second one is special concerns. This means they're not on the verge of either going extinct or endangered, but they are something that are being affected by climate change or habitat loss, and they may be on the brink of being into the next two categories. The next category is threatened. This is a category which is raised the interest. The director of the wildlife facilities are the only person that can put one of these species on there, and they're basing it on the decision that the field representatives give to say that this particular species is threatened to go to the next stage, which is then endangered. Endangered means almost the same as extinct. There may be only one or two of these species left here, and so this has raised all types of concerns. So if you're not sure why you should care about amphibians species, consider these 9 amazing benefits that they bring. Amphibians play an important role in nature, both as predators and prey. They eat pests, insects, which benefits agriculture around the world and helps minimize the spread of disease. Amphibian skins contain a myriad of different types of peptides, offering possibility for medical cures for a variety of human diseases. It's already used in some painkillers, high blood pressure medication, and to block HIV transmission and treat antibacterial-resistant bacteria strains. As species disappear, so do the potential treatments. Amphibians are truly the superheroes of our nature world. They have the ability to regrow limbs, which is now being studied to shed light on how to improve tissue regeneration and growth in humans. Amphibians have a special place in various human cultures for centuries and are cherished as agents of luck, life, and good luck. Amphibians were the first vertebrates to colonize land, evolving around 370 million years ago, and have survived 4 mass extinctions. Please, don't let them go in this one. Amphibians, believe it or not, have assisted us with NASA in the study of space. And frogs are to the night what birds are to the day. Can you imagine what the forest in the marshes would be like without their course? So the magic number 9, that was 9 interesting facts that we said, hey, that maybe draw us to the importance of why we should recognize our amphibians and our reptiles. And as Lauren mentioned, she also said they are indicator species. And we're going to find out throughout our presentation what an indicator species and what role each of them play. But 9 is also another important factor. 9 happens to be the number of native toads and frogs that we have in the state of Maine. So what are they? Well, we have the American toad, we have the gray tree frog, we have the spring peeper, we have the bullfrog, we have the green frog, we have the pickerel frog, we have the northern red frog, we have the mink frog, and we have the wood frog. So really, when we're out there looking, and so we're saying, we mentioned both the words amphibians and reptiles. So how do we tell them apart? Well, an amphibian will have a wet, moisty skin, except for toads and red F's. And a reptile will have a dry, scaly skin. So really, when we get down to it, how do we tell the difference between a toad and a frog? Well, a toad has a dry, bumpy skin, and a frog has a moist skin. A frog, for the most part, will live on land, and for the most part, a frog will live in the water. A toad has shorter legs, and a frog has long, powerful legs. Believe it or not, a toad is toothless, but can you imagine that frogs have teeth? Yes, they do. So here's a quick overview of what a toad would look like. Things that are important for us to take a look at is, believe it or not, they have a webbed toes on their hind feet, and this is because in the springtime, they will actually swim in vernal pools. Again, that's something that Lauren mentioned, the importance of having vernal pools around, because that's where they'll do their breeding. They also have a temporum, which is an eardrum located right behind the eye. This is their capability of hearing. They also have a seat patch, which is going to play an important role because, as we're about to learn, what toads and frogs, this is the first question. So this is one of the polling questions that we're going to have. Toads and frogs quiz question number 1. What is the name of Maine's only toad? Go ahead and select your choices now. We'll give it about a minute, and then afterwards, we're going to show the results.
It looks like almost everybody voted.
Great. A lot of you are listening. As we mentioned, Maine, let's take a look at what the answer is. So Maine only has one toad. It is the American toad. It lives in almost every habitat except for saltwater throughout the state of Maine. It's widespread, again, throughout the state of Maine. Its breeding season is from April to May, so it has already concluded its breeding season. And just yesterday, I happened to be walking through our property here and came across a small male toad. Male toads are smaller than females. So, but here's the important thing. Each eat up to 1,000 insects every day. These are really gardeners' best friends. Their seat patch that I mentioned earlier is the way they absorb water. They don't drink water through their mouth like we would think they would do. But 70% of the water absorption that toads get comes from that seat pack located right around their stomach. Their sizes usually range from 2 to 4.5 inches, with females being larger than males. And their calls can last up to 30 seconds or more. Right now, they enjoy the status of least concern here in the state of Maine. And this is what a toad would sound like. So here's a big question. Well, where do they go in the winter? Where do the American toads hibernate in the winter? Well, they are good diggers and burying deep in the soil, safely below the frost line. So they'll stay on land and bury themselves in the soil. So here's a little fun fact about toads. contrary to popular belief, you will not develop warts if you touch a toad. So now moving on to, away from toads to frogs, here's a quick overview of the anatomy of a frog. Notice that the nostrils and the eyes are almost at the same level because primarily frogs are ambush predators and they will lay low in the water and wait for prey to swim by and then attack it. So that's why they have it. They also have a temperum, which is also, size does matter here because the size will dictate whether it's a male or female. Also notice in this particular frog, we have a dorsal lateral fold, which will distinguish this particular frog, which happens to be a green frog, from that of a bullfrog. So here's a quick question. Which Maine species of frog will often stay in a tadpole stage up to 2 years before becoming a frog? Is it A, bullfrog, B, milk frog, C, wood frog? Oh, congratulations. 70% of you got it right. It definitely is a bullfrog, and they will stay in this stage up until almost 2 years of their life, almost going to 2.5 years before they become an adult frog. So they live in shallow fresh water. They're throughout the state of Maine. They're 8 inches from the tip of their nose to their vent. The vent is at the rear end, and from the tip of their nose to there. So they're one of the largest frogs that we have in the state of Maine. They're late breeders, though. Right now, June through July, they are breeding, and maturity is usually reached between 4 to 5 years of age. They're ambush predators, as I mentioned earlier. That's where the alignment between the nostrils and the eyes come into big play. They will lay and wait and for their prey to come by and then attack it. They can live up to an average of 10 years in the wild. And keep in mind now, it's taken them 2 years to 3 years to go from a tadpole stage to an adult. They reach sexual maturity around 4 to 5 years, and then they have the capability of reproducing for another 5 years. They're named because they get their name bullfrog because the males produce a cow-like mooing sound. Right now in the state of Maine, they're enjoying a least concern status, and this is what they sound like. So again, where do North American bullfrogs like to hibernate in the winter? Well, they will typically hibernate underwater. A common misconception is they will spend the winter the way some turtles do, dug deep into the mud. And in fact, hibernating bullfrogs will suffocate if they dig deep into the mud for any extended period of time. So hibernating frogs, however, must be near oxygen-rich water and spend a good portion of the winter just laying on the top of the mud or partially buried. Sometimes you may even, if you look down through the ice, you may even see them slowly swimming around. Their whole system has shut down. They have gone from a hyperactive state to almost a lethargic state, and that's what keeps them alive when they do. So they are active throughout the winter. So do they ever go into any true hibernation? No. So here's a fun fact. I had mentioned earlier that they had helped us with space. In 1970, NASA launched 2 bullfrogs into space to study weightlessness. They weren't Maine frogs, though, I don't think. So here's another quick question. This is toad and frog question number 3. Which main species of frog can be distinguished by the dark colored X across their back? Is it A, green frog, B, ray frog, C, spring peeper? It's a toughie. This is a toughie. 76% of you got it correct. It is the spring peeper. So the spring peeper, this is what they look like. And the spring peepers are found in mixed woodlands, near ponds, marshes, or swamps. They're all found throughout the state of Maine. They are actually the first sign of spring. This is so many of us can't wait to hear their chorus of spring peepers, because then we know that spring has finally sprung. But they're one of a few of 5 species of frogs that can literally freeze and survive. We happen to have 3 in the state of Maine. They are also Maine's smallest frog, only about 1 to 1.5 inches long. And a chorus of peepers can be heard a half a mile away. They too are enjoying a least concern status in the state of Maine, which bodes well for what we do for water quality and clarity. And thanks to people at the Seven Lakes Alliance for all the work that they do, has allowed these species to continue to not only live, but to thrive. So what does a spring peeper sound like? So where do spring peepers like to hibernate in the winter? Well, in the winter, they hibernate under logs or behind loose bark or on trees, waiting for spring to thaw and their chances to sing. They can allow most of their body to freeze during winter hibernation and still survive. So here's a fun fact. Did you know a group of toads is called a knot, but yet a group of frogs is called an army? Question number 4. Which main species of frog is not only found in our state, but is the only amphibian found as far north as the Arctic Circle? Is it A, North American bullfrog, B, wood frog, C, northern leopard frog? Ah, interesting. And it's actually the wood frog. The wood frog is the frog that is found as far north as the Arctic Circle. So they are entirely land-based except during the breeding season. They're found throughout the state of Maine. They're first to breed prefer vernal pools. So these are the first frogs that will venture from spring thaw into the vernal pools to breed. Their life expectancy in the wild is between somewhere around 3 years, and they will grow to 2.4 inches long. And they have a very distinct feature on them. They have what looks like to be a robber's mask, and that's the dark area directly under their eyes. So that's how you can determine whether you have a wood frog. They also saying because not only spring peepers, but wood frogs, they're being studied right now for human donor or organ for transplants. Not so much in the aspect of the transplant itself, but how do they increase the shelf life or the longevity of a transplanted organ before the recipient gets it. So these are things that they're looking at and being evaluated for. They also, when you have the privilege of walking to a vernal pool in the springtime, they will sound like a bunch of ducks quacking. And again, here in the state of Maine, they are least concerned. So what do they sound like? So again, where do wood frogs hibernate in the winter? Well, we know that they're primarily terrestrial. The fact that the only time that they spend any time in the water is for breeding. So they will hibernate by nesting down into leafy litter on the forest floor. So here's a fun fact. Wood frogs do not have webbed front feet since they spend so much of their time in the forest. Recall, the American toad does not have webbed front feet as well too. So they both go hand in hand with wanting to live on the land. So here's question number 5. Which Maine species of frog has an astounding capability to camouflage themselves and have 18 adhesive toe pads suited for climbing? Is it A, pickerel frog, B, spring peeper, C, gray tree frog? Well, let's find out who's right or who's wrong. It happens to be the gray tree frog, which inhabits forests and perches on trees and shrubs. You're not going to find them. I mean, you may find them close to the shore of waterways such as ponds or lakes, but they really prefer to be living on trees or perched on trees and shrubs. Remember what we said about their capability of being camouflaged? Is this a gray tree frog? It looks green to me. It is truly a gray tree frog that happened to be living in a bunch of shrubbery that had literally changed its complexion to go ahead and more represent the green shrubbery than the gray surroundings of, say, inside of a forest. So they're found mostly in the southern and central part of Maine. They're late breeders, waiting until the air temperature is over 68 degrees. So far, they may not be breeding according to the season that we've had here on the coast. So they can live up to 8 years, and they can grow to about 2.5. During hibernation, 80% of their body freezes. Remember I said there were 5? This is the third. This is the third frog that we have in the state of Maine. The wood frog, the spring peeper, and the gray tree frog have the ability to freeze and survive. And they have, believe it or not, the loudest call measured for all of North American frogs. And here in the state of Maine, we have a least concern status. So where do gray tree frogs like to hibernate in the winter? Well, again, they're land-based, except for when they will have spring reproduction. So they will hibernate on their tree roots and leaves. And here's a fun fact. A frog's age can be determined by its growth rings. The growth rings are the bones form a growth ring every year when the frog is hibernating. Very similar to the way the rings are found on trees. And so when uh, herpetologists are studying these various amphibians, one of the ways that they can do to determine how old they are is to take a look at the rings associated around their bones. Question number 6. Which Maine species of frog sometimes goes by these other names? Grass frog, meadow frog, shag frog, or herring hopper? Is it the green frog? Is it the northern leopard frog? Is it the mink frog? Oh, very close one. Oh, very, very close. Let's find out together. It happens to be the northern leopard frog. It goes by multiple names. And they live near a permanent source of water. And they grow anywhere between 2 to 4 inches. And they cover the entire state of Maine. But they're not as popular as the frog we're about to talk about, but often confused with this type of frog. Their life expectancy in the wild is anywhere between 5 and 8 years. And they have 2 to 3 uneven spaced rows of irregular oval-shaped dark spots. The dark spots on the back will be an indicator factor that says that they're not a pickerel frog, which happens to be the other frog that they're often confused for. So when we get into the pickerel frog, we're going to find out that their spots are more evenly spaced and more parallel. And in this particular case, they're a little bit irregular. The amazing fact about this is that they can clear a span of 8 feet in a single leap. That's 15 times their body length. They have 3 distinct calls. One is to inform people about danger, the other frogs about danger. The other one is to say that if they're being harassed by another frog, there's a call of that, and then there's a mating call. But here in the state of Maine, they are listed as special concern. So right now, it isn't so much, but a lot of us, when we were growing up, when we were in high school, we had the opportunity to dissect frogs in our biology class. And unfortunately, this was one of the species that was used quite often in that determination of that until they switched over to more of the South American type of frog. But before that, it was this. The second is the consumption of their part of that leg, which is unfortunately, they have the ability to leap 8 feet in a single leap, but that's also a meaty portion of their legs. And so that becomes a diet. So where do northern leopard frogs like to hibernate in the winter? Well, they hibernate in the water that will not completely freeze over in the winter. So that's where they're going to be going. I mean, they like to live near permanent bodies of water. And so they will head out to those type of areas that will not completely freeze over in the winter. So did you know that northern leopard frogs use their eyes to help with swallowing food? The northern leopard frog retracts its eyes and uses them to help push down the food down their throat. Question number 7. Which Maine species of frog produces a scent which smells like a mink? Could it be A, mink frog, B, northern leopard frog, C, pickerel frog? Oh, congratulations. We almost all got it correct. So it is the mink frog. This happens to be a mink frog. It's also considered the frog of the north, 43 degrees latitude. This is a frog you're going to find more up in the Katahdin region than you are around this area. So up in the Katahdin, the northern part of the region is where you're going to find it. They are exclusively aquatic, preferring shallow water with floating lily pads. They also have to have a certain temperature range within the water. That's why you're not going to find them throughout the rest of the state, where it needs to be a little cooler, a little fresher, more oxygen in the water for them to survive. But they're usually a medium size, somewhere between 2 to 3 inches. They breed in the spring and early summer and have been known to live up to 6 years in the wild. This is where they get their name. Their skin produces a musty odor like a mink when handled. And so when you handle it, one of the ways that they release themselves, or one of the ways that they have to fight off predators, is to give this foul tasting odor. So I know that earlier we got a question, and I'll address it after the end of the presentation, that primarily, what is the diet of frogs in general, or what is the diet of this particular frog? It's spiders, snails, beetles, other invertebrates. Primarily, the frog's diets will consist of invertebrates, including that of the toad. But on occasion, they're carnivorous, and so they may even end up eating each other or the tadpoles as they grow up. So they're very big predators, but yes, also play a very important role in our ecosystem to keep a lot of these unwanted species such as mosquitoes and so on at bay. This is an unusual sound, and because some of us may not be up in the Katahdin region, it makes a rapid tap, tap, tap sound representing two pieces of wood being tapped together. They also are enjoying a least concern status here in the state of Maine, and this is what they sound like. So here's a fun fact. I had mentioned earlier, but people who study frogs and toads are called herpetologists. Herpetology is the study of amphibians and reptiles. So where do the mink frogs hibernate in the winter? Well, they hibernate using a deep water technique. They will go as low as possible they can in their freshwater ponds or lakes. Also, another little fun fact about the mink frog. They love lily pads. They will love to sit on a lily pad all day long and wait for their prey to come by. So if you get a chance to get up there and you go by some freshwater ponds, Take a look, and you might, and that are full of lily pads, you have a great chance of finding a Maine frog. Question number 8. Which species of frog is the only native, oh my goodness, poisonous species found in the United States? Is it A, pickerel frog? Is it B, northern leopard frog? Is it C, wood frog? Wow, we got a very intelligent group on us with this webinar tonight. I mean, you managed to get it right. It happens to be the pickerel frog, which happens to be in spring runs. It loves the springy aspect. If you have a spring on your property, you're going to find a pickerel frog. It loves hilly ravines and even bog. It's widespread throughout the state of Maine. It's often confused for the leopard frog. Remember how we talked about how their spots almost look the same? The leopard frog is going to be greenish. Um, the pickerel frog is going to be more bronze. They emerge from hibernation in late April, early May, and that's when their breeding season begins. They're bronze in color with 2 hand-drawn parallel rows down the squarish spots down their back. They're an indicator species. You got a pickerel frog on your property and it's located near the water, you've got a high quality water source. These are frogs that cannot tolerate any pollution, high levels of pollution, let me put it that way. So if, again, these are great ways of indicating if pickerel frogs once were prominent in your area and now you don't see them as much, you might want to check your water source, because this is one way of nature letting us know that we have an issue or a problem. So what do they sound like? Well, can you imagine a pickerel fisherman has fallen asleep? This is a fisherman, not a frog. So he's snoring. That is what a pickerel frog sounds like. Right now, they're enjoying least concern status here in the state of Maine. They were also known and got their name because they were the frog of choice for fishermen who were attempting to try to catch pickerel frogs, pickerel fish. So this is what they sound like. So where do pickerel frogs hibernate in the winter? Well, you will find them hibernating under the dirt, debris, the silt, the debris of their aquatic environment. So most frogs have teeth, although usually only in the upper jaw. The teeth are used to hold prey in place until the frog can swallow it. Our final question for this evening, question number 9. Which Maine species of frog has a ridge from behind their eyes down their back? Is it A, bullfrog, B, green frog, C, gray frog? The answer is, wow, it's interesting. I mean, this is a big distinguishing difference between the bullfrog and the green frog. So let's take a closer look. It is happens to be the green frog. They have that line that's running directly from their eye down their back. So they will typically be found on the shores and banks of ponds, lakes, and streams and waters in close proximity as their neighbors are the bullfrogs. They are found throughout the state of Maine. They can live up to 10 years in the wild. Their predominant dorsal lateral fold is, and they grow to be about 2 to 4 inches. And keep in mind, when we said the bullfrog can get up to 8 inches. I happen to live in Addison, Maine. I have yet to find a bullfrog of that size. But when we used to visit the southern portion of Maine in the Portland area, it was not unusual for us to find a bullfrog that size. But in this particular case, size will matter, determining if it's a green frog or a bullfrog. They have bulging eyes, and they make a sound like a loose banjo string. They are enjoying a least concern status here in the state of Maine, and this is what they sound like. So where do green frogs like to hibernate? Well, they'll hibernate just like a bullfrog and a northern leopard frog, under the water, but not submerged in the mud. And again, you may find them active if you're looking through the ice. You may see them swimming by as well. So amphibians must shed their skin as they get bigger in size. The old skin comes off like a piece of clothing that has become too tight. Usually this shed skin is then eaten by the frog. Yuck. So really, we talked about it. We said 40% of the amphibians worldwide are endangered. We here in the state of Maine are doing fairly well as it comes to our frog population. But these are some of the biggest threats that we are facing. Habitat fragmentation and loss. Fragmentation is easily explained that the fact that they may have a vernal pool or a waterway or some type of thing, and they're going to put a road through it, cutting off both sides of the pond. That would be fragmentation. Fragmentation, a loss or habitat loss would be completely abolishing the vernal pool or the waterway. So as we grow in the state of Maine, we have to play an important role that we must live hand in hand with nature and take into consideration their environment as well as our own. Climate change, just like anywhere else, we're not escaping the climate change. Things that maybe concern me is what it's going to happen to our mink frog because it is so temperature related. Any changes in that water temperature, we may see them go from least common or least concern to the next stages, which I hope doesn't happen. And then finally, roadkill. There is a season that we have where a lot of our amphibians will cross roads because they like to go back to the same place that they've gone year after year after year to lay their eggs, fertilize their eggs, and have those. And those are the vernal pools. So now we have put roadways in. And so on the first warm spring nights of the year, after an all-day rain, they will try to migrate across, and we will go through. So not all is lost. So how can we help? Well, give the frogs some of your time. So what I mean by that is enjoy them. So where you see them, leave them there. It's important that we don't touch them. You make mistakes. We talked about the pickerel frog being poisonous. Well, it's not only poisonous to prey that might want to eat it because of the toxin that it emits from its skin. It's also poisonous to other frogs. So if we're happen to go around and we decided we're going to take 2 or 3 frogs home to see if we can raise them, we happen to mix a pickerel frog with some other frogs, well, the consequences can be quite devastating. Also, it says, be good environmental stewards. That goes without saying. Again, as we had mentioned earlier, um, be kind to your wildlife when you're out there. Be respectful. Don't pollute their waterways, their systems. Participate in things like, which is the final thing, get involved with Seven Lakes Alliance. They're doing an incredible job. They're doing wonderful things to protect our waterways and allow us to still retain this proper position with protecting our wildlife. So we mentioned earlier, and some of us might be confused. A lot of us say, hey, what's a vernal pole? Well, a vernal pole is something that is seasonal. It can just be seasonal. It's usually a crevice or a ditch or even a side of a roadway where water will fill up. Year after year, our wood frogs and our salamanders will make the journey here. They will lay their eggs, they will fertilize, their eggs will become hatched, and then their offspring will migrate back into the forest, surrounding forest. But this is it. So again, so the next time you're by a vernal pool, close your eyes, open your mind, and listen to the frogs sing. Thank you. Lauren, that's it.
Yeah, so there are two questions in the chat. I don't know if you can see the chat with your screen up.
No, I can stop sharing now. Let's see what happens. Okay, how's that?
Yep.
Not there. Okay. What were the questions? I can't see them. I'm sorry.
That's okay. The first one is one of the reasons for decline in amphibian population by illegal poaching for medicines.
Oh, well, that's an excellent question. Poaching, yes. Poaching for medicine, I'm unaware, but somebody might be able to shed a little more light on that than I am. I mean, the poaching aspect had a devastating effect. That at one time, there used to be licenses that the state of Maine would issue for, say, the harvesting of bullfrogs or maybe leopard frogs until it got out of hand. And that was more for meat consumption and biology study that I was aware of. So if somebody can shed, maybe do a quick little thing in the chat that says, hey, we got people coming up here poaching for medicine. I'm unaware of it, but I would love to find out more about it.
The next question is, and if anybody else has questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A section. The second question is, we've been hearing fewer, this is from Peter Beckerman. The last one was from Lily. We've been hearing fewer and fewer peepers in our woods in Sydney the past few years. Is there a problem?
You know, that's funny. That's funny you mentioned it. I too, and we're in Addison, Maine, which is up by Machias or Ellsworth, if you're familiar with that area. We too are experiencing the same demise. This year, I set out to try to find a spring peeper so that I could photograph more of the X on the back to make it more distinguished when we talked about it. I had one good night to be able to do it, and literally, I only heard one. And it's kind of ironic because somebody had mentioned that earlier in another previous frog presentation that I gave, that they were not hearing spring peepers in the state of Maine. So I think I might reach out to Derek York, who happens to be the head herpetologist for the state of Maine, and ask him if he's noticing the same thing. And if I do get a response from him, I will get back with Lauren, but I will tell you, I think it's universal here, and it's a little frightening because they used to be, between wood frogs and spring peepers, they were the two prominent species of frogs that we had in the state of Maine.
The other question is also about peepers, and it says, we have a shallow wetland. This is from Cindy Ecker. I hope I said that right. We have a shallow wetland in a small empty home lot on our street. In the spring, we hear peepers. Are they a doomed population even if no house is built there?
Well, I don't think they're doomed. Again, that may have a play with climate uh, climate conditions. If it warms up earlier in the spring and that shallow impregnation of water evaporates, they won't get to be able to live out their full term to go from the stages that they have to go into some way of leaving that vernal pole. That would be one concern. The second thing that I would do is I'll lump this in with roadkill. Uh, the last photo I showed was the ruts in the road. Well, those ruts were contributed by four-wheelers. And I'm not anti four-wheeling. I'm just saying that at a certain time in the year, say April and May, we should be more cautious about riding through those things. So I don't think they're doomed in your area. I just would keep an eye on the water level.
I don't see any other questions. Does anybody else have any other questions? You can also raise your hand there's a button for it. We'll just give it a minute if anybody else has any questions, but thank you everyone that came tonight. Oh, Peter Beckerman asked, how do they breathe all winter underwater?
Well, that's a great question, Peter. And the fact that what they do is they are not, that's why they're considering moving in around open freshwater areas. They have gone from, like I said, that hyper state of activity to almost a torpor. A torpor is like a level above hibernation where they're not in a complete hibernation state, but all the things are slowing. But as the water rushes over them, or the water's there, they're picking up oxygen out of the water. That's what's allowing them to survive. Now, where is the most prominent area on a frog to be able to pick up oxygen out of the water? It is their rear end. It's their butt. Frogs actually breathe underwater through their butt. It's true. And so that's where they will pick up their oxygenated water, or levels of oxygen from the water. So that's how they do it.
Any other questions? Oh, Stephen Neumeister, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your names right. How do species that need to not entirely freeze to survive keep from entirely freezing?
Well, that's again another great question, and that's for our scientists to determine. What is it in the fact that would only allow 80% of their body, their eyes to become opaque, their breathing to go very slow, and so that's why they're studying them right now. They're finding out why is it that they don't completely freeze, what is it that keeps them up, and so on. I don't have the answer to that. All I know is that of the 5 species that we have in North America, that we have 3 of them here in the state of Maine that are being studied, that do show signs of being able to reach 80% frozen levels and not die from it. So they're saying it's unlike a technical term. They're saying there's an anti-freeze capability within their bloodstream that allows them to be able to do